Hello, I'm Lindsay with Happy Hour Stitches, and today I'm going to walk you through the process of creating bias binding with just a small square of fabric. Much less fabric waste, so much easier than a traditional method of making it. So let me show you how. So we have a formula in the video description on how to figure out the size square you need to make the amount of bias binding you need. Once you have that square cut out, you're going to cut it in half on the diagonal from corner to corner. Then you're going to take this top piece, move it over, and we're going to sew the pieces together on this seam. Okay, I've sewed our pieces together and I've pressed the seam open. Now we're going to turn our piece so it is up and down like this, and I'm going to mark across the entire strip using measurements for how wide I want my binding to be. So I am choosing to do 2.5 inch wide binding. So I am going to mark lines every 2.5 inches. So you can use a pencil for this, a marking tool, whatever you want. I'm going to be using my hair marker. That's my favorite marking tool. So I have 2.5 inch mark lined up with the edge. Just going to mark that. Okay, and then I'm gonna keep marking until I've marked across the entire strip of fabric. Okay, so I've marked every 2.5 inches. I did come back through and use the pen to mark because my hair marker lines weren't showing up very well on camera, so I went back in with the pen. But our next step is we're going to mark lines 1/4 inch in from both of these ends. And that is so we can take our seam allowance into consideration before we line our pieces up and sew them together. So just lining up 1/4 inch. Just gonna take my pen. You will use a removable marking tool of your choice. I'm just gonna do this on both ends. And then we are going to align our pieces for sewing to get continuous bias binding. Now you're going to lay your binding piece right side up and you're gonna fold it in half. So fold it in half until you can see your lines are all lining up. And then you're gonna do something that feels wrong. You're gonna pull the corners until the lines align with one off than they were when they lined up. So you can see it's kind of stretching this way. And we're gonna sew along this seam. So I'm going to make sure these lines are lined up and I'm going to put pins through where the 1/4 inch mark meets on these diagonal lines. And that will make sure that it's accounting for my seam allowance so that when I sew, the lines align perfectly. Okay, I have a pin going through. You can see this. Pin it in place. And then I'm just gonna do this with the other lines, pushing a pin through where the 1/4 inch line and the line meet. Okay, I'm gonna do that all the way across and then I'm gonna sew this seam together. Okay, as you can see, I sewed along that seam, and now I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut along those drawn lines all the way around. And you want to make sure you're not cutting through both sides of the fabric when you go. You just want to cut that top piece of fabric on the line, and you're just going to do that all the way around. It's going to kind of spiral as you cut. And this will just form one long piece of bias binding for you to use in your projects. Okay, and you will see here is my seamed binding strip ready to go. I will just take this over to my my ironing board, fold it in half, and I have nice, stretchy bias binding I can use for all of my curved projects using just a small square of fabric.